Welcome back to Viewpoint. I'm Jim Zogby, and on the phone with us right now is Michael Singh. He's director of the documentary film Valentino's Ghost. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
The book traces, the film rather, traces I'm looking at my jacket and the lighting. As you look like I'm in a prison suit here. The film traces the films over the last century of treatment of Arabs and Muslims in American cinema, and goes through a series of phases. Just lay out, if you would, the phases that you want to sort of, that you go through in the film.
Yes, well, really three only. I tried to make it as basic as I could, and the first that fascinated me was the early days when Arabs were very romantic. They were heroes in Hollywood with films like Rudolph Valentino's The Sheikh and Douglas Fairbanks' Thief of Baghdad. There were several other actors vying for these fantasy roles based loosely on the Arabian Nights. After that came the Legionnaire films, where Hollywood took American Indians versus the cowboys, those plots, and set them in a very similar environment in the Middle East. They were natives, they lived in tents, they rode horses across these lawless frontiers, and they attacked the good Christian people who just happened to be invading. So it was a very similar situation where the natives were considered the attackers, even though the Europeans, or in America's case, the Americans, were the ones that were coming into the land. That was the second phase. And the third phase, it was something that we discovered, actually my researcher, Catherine Jordan, and producer, discovered when we spent many, many days down in Nashville going through television shows at an archive down there. And we discovered that the Palestinians were actually portrayed sympathetically by major American news networks. This was a surprise to us, but we have the evidence. And if you've seen the film, you'll see the evidence of major network news describing their motivations, giving them the microphone. Everything changed after Munich, where Palestinian commandos, as they were called, took over the Israeli athletes' team and ended up in a terrible massacre. After that, Arabs and Muslims were depicted in the news and by the government as the embodiment of evil, and that continues till today. So those are the three phases.
Absent education or direct experience, what you end up with is that film creates reality. Popular culture in general, film, books, TV, creates this impression. It's interesting that the films that Jack Shaheen writes about, that you portray in your documentary, have two predominant images of Arabs. There's the terrorist, and then there's the oil sheikh. That's the images today. And when we poll and we ask Americans, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of an Arab, 80% say either oil or violence or terror. And that's basically what they've learned. It's received knowledge through films. So it does play a huge role in shaping the culture.
And foreign policy as well, because the people who are creating foreign policy are Americans brought up on these movies.
It's kind of a dialectic, though, isn't it? In the sense that the films, many of them were done with a political agenda, and then they create the impressions that then validate the policies which they're, the film The Exodus, for example, was clearly a propaganda film which sort of transitions from that cowboy Indian role, morphing the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the cowboy versus Indians, and the Indians being the Palestinians who are the savages denying freedom on the frontier. That shaped the identity of Palestinians in the mind of Americans for decades.
Well, as Jack Shaheen, who is the source of so much of this subject, says in Valentino's Ghost, Exodus was probably one of the most brilliant pieces of propaganda since World War II. Yeah. And it did begin with a Madison Avenue source who persuaded Hollywood to commission a young writer, Leon Uris, to go to Israel and paint a favorable portrait of the situation from the Israeli viewpoint. And so, yes, a lot of Americans, Jewish Americans, Arab Americans, and WASPs, every group is brought up with that mythology that was laid down so well by Exodus.
The film is extraordinary. I used it in a class that I taught at NYU this January. It premieres at a theater in Dallas on the 10th of March. What are the rest of the plans for the film nationally, and what are your hopes for it?
My hopes are to get it on PBS. They were the first to approach me, and they have been very brave about other subjects, blacks and Jews and Chinese Americans, gays in the media, and so this was a glaring omission. They spent quite a bit of money. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting has on this film. It's very controversial. I'm so glad that you liked it. You know the controversies in it. So PBS is under a lot of congressional pressure to conform to the national narrative, shall we say, and this film reveals the national narrative for what it is. So I'm not sure how easy it will be for PBS to broadcast it. The last I heard was last week, when they indicated that if I had an hour's version, they would consider it. So absent other networks going for it, I think PBS would be the best home. HBO, History Channel, Showtime, there are others that could possibly broadcast it.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks so much for doing this, and thanks for making the film in the first place. It's a great teaching tool. I recommend it, and we'd like to see what we can do to help as we go forward. But that's all the time we've got for now. For more information, you can follow us on Twitter at AIUSA. Log on to the website at aiusa.org. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week on Viewpoint.